Well, good morning again. You can't see the forest because of the trees. That's a popular idiom, is it not? That describes a situation where in life we can be so caught up with the day-to-day details of things. We can be so caught up with the day-to-day runnings, the details of our life, that we can't see the big picture. All we can see is the big trees in the road. And if there's ever any time of the year that I think that saying would be true, it's probably around this time of year. You know, school is back on, so kids are back at school, parents are doing drop-off and pick-up again. Work's kind of returned for a few weeks now, so that holiday brain that you developed during the holidays is no longer a very good excuse not to be productive at your workplace anymore. Some of the jobs that you said you're going to do before Christmas that you didn't do, that you said you're going to do on your holidays, but you didn't because you're on holidays, now actually really due. Everything has returned. The busyness is back. The trees are fully grown and they're blocking the big picture view of life. This was true of me the other day. I was going through some notes and I came across something I'd written down. You know those things you write down so you don't forget? Well, it didn't really work this time for me. I wrote it down back in November and completely forgot all about it. And I was a bit disappointed because it was actually a good piece of advice, a bit of a goal that I wanted to have for the next few months ahead. But I completely missed it. And the ironic thing is that it was a big picture kind of goal that I forgot immediately on that day because I got caught up with the day-to-day things. I wonder how many things, how many goals, how many aspirations at the beginning of the year have now kind of gone awash in your mind. I wonder how many things you might have forgotten about so far because of the trees. We often can't see the forest because of the trees. And churches, we aren't exempt from this. Churches can get very much caught up in the day-to-day things as well. We can get caught up in our traditions, our habits of just how things have always been done, and we can forget about the why we actually do them. We can forget about the big picture that we're actually aiming for, or what it actually informs us to be. We often can't see the forest for the trees. And our church is not exempt for this. We too often, as a church, I've noticed over a number of years, get caught up in the details, the everyday things. You might be able to think of a couple things in your mind. I'm sure we have our own little things that catches us up that we kind of forget about the big picture as well. Forget about the forest. But as a church, we simply can't afford to do that. Too much is at stake when churches forget the big picture. Don't you agree? Too much is at stake. The Christian life is more than just trees. It's about the forest too. And so this week and next week, we're going to take a break from our 1 Samuel series to instead focus on the big picture. The things that we often forget in the Christian life, so we don't lose sight of what Jesus has entrusted to us to do. So that for 2026, us as a church, as Chancellor Church, we would be forest-type people as well as tree-type people. We'd hold them both in the tension well. And how we're going to do that is we're going to break down our mission. Our mission here as a church is glorify God and make disciples. That's what we're called to as a church to do every day, glorify God and make disciples. But the making disciples part of that mission, though, involves more than we think when we say making disciples. Well, more that comes to our mind. Making disciples, I'm convinced, involves making disciples, yes, as in going out and sharing our faith so that people can come and place their faith in Jesus and become followers of Him. But it also includes maturing people in that faith. So not only just aren't making people who kind of come to faith, but we're also helping them mature in their faith so they can become more and more like Jesus. But on top of that, we don't just want to make disciples and mature disciples. We want to make sure that the disciples we're making will also multiply. As in, they are the type of people who come to faith and are matured in the faith, and they see that part of maturity in a Christian life is actually working to make disciples ourselves and mature other people in ourselves as well. We want to make disciples who mature and multiply themselves so that they multiply other disciples and they multiply other disciples. So you have disciples making disciples, and the gospel news is spread and people are mature in their faith. We can't forget that making disciples involves these things as well. It involves maturity, involves multiplication. And so that's why this year our endeavour will be to do these things too. In 2006, we're going to be focusing on making, maturing, and multiplying disciples together. Together being as a church, but also together being with Jesus himself. So as ensure that we are living a life in light of the big picture Jesus gives us. So we don't lose sight of the forest, so that we can live up to the responsibility for these things that Jesus has entrusted us with together as a church. So to do that, we're going to focus on this week on making disciples, and next week we're going to be looking at maturing and multiplying. So let's start off in Matthew 28 today. So turn there if you haven't already and go down to verses 16 to 20. There's another popular saying in our culture these days, and you often find it on the internet, and it's this: I don't like this timeline we are in. As if somehow there's a lot of parallel universes that people find themselves in with lots of parallel kind of timelines. And this one we're in, they're saying, well, they're not a big fan of it anymore. And they kind of want to jump ship into another timeline. I'm sure you can relate to that at different times of your life. It's tempting to want to be able to shift to a different timeline of your life when things aren't going well, or maybe something in the past that you don't like, you want to move to another timeline so that past isn't there anymore. That would be fantastic, I'm sure, at times. However, I think a better desire than to jump to a different timeline, which of course we have no proof of existing, is rather remembering what era we are in our timeline. I think that's a better desire, remembering what era we're actually in. And that's what I want us to do this morning. I want to remind us of what era we are in. In Matthew 28, during Jesus' famous Great Commission, Jesus starts off his commission detailing that there has been a big shift in the universe. In verse 18, he says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore," he says, as he starts off in verse 19. The shift is that Jesus has been given authority over heaven and earth. And that is, as we see in verse 19, has implications for us as his followers. But what does it exactly mean that Jesus has authority over heaven and earth? Well, to understand that requires us understanding a bit of the Bible's biggest storyline. You see, way back in Genesis chapter 3, when mankind first sinned and led the world into a broken relationship with God, God said this to the devil, the snake who deceived mankind. In verse 15, he said, "I will put an enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." As in, the activity of the snake would cause havoc in this world. Its impacts would be felt. And as we look around the world, we see this all the time. We can see it in our day and age where sin and rebellion against God has reaped havoc on the place. Mankind goes against God's designs, as mankind fails to love the creation that God has created, as mankind fails to love, each other, as mankind fails to love the God who made them in love. This is the reason that we long for better timelines. This is the reason we want to kind of move to a different spot in life. The brokenness of that day of Adam and Eve continues to mar our paths in the different eras of history. We want to go somewhere else. But despite this reality, there is also hope in these verses. God said an offspring would come that would crush that serpent's head. A decisive victory would come, or bruise here in the ESV translation. And as we look throughout the Bible storyline, we wait for this victory to come. We see some potentials, like when David defeated Goliath. Goliath stood as representative of Israel's enemies, and David was able to defeat him with God's help. Or we look at the life of King Solomon. His kingdom had such far-reaching impacts. It was a huge nation. Israel increased its borders. There was peace. They had peace from their enemies. It was a good time. But such victories in the Bible are only ever short-lived. The peace attained is a peace shortly left soon after. No offspring was found who could bring true victory. They could solve the consequences of mankind's rebellion. In fact, as the Bible carries on in its storyline, the bleakness of humanity, it gets worse and worse. And almost to the end of the Old Testament, you start thinking, can it actually be redeemed? Can humanity be redeemed from their complete and utter rebellion of God and the impact it has on this world? However, in the New Testament, as we know, we're introduced to a figure called Jesus. And interestingly, one of the first stories that we are told about Jesus is his time being tempted by Satan. Now, this may not stand out as a very important story. Often we kind of flick past it, I think, as we read the Bible. If anything, it sounds a bit odd. But it is an actually important part of the story because it highlights that Jesus was different. Jesus didn't give in to the deception of the devil like Adam and Eve did and all subsequent humanity after them. No, he followed God and trusted in him. He passed a test, as you will, that nobody else was able to pass. In fact, Jesus is uniquely described in the New Testament as completely following God. He is never described as getting into temptation. It seems that the devil's charms really have no power over him. In fact, Jesus was so dedicated to God and following him that he obeyed God even when such obedience required his death, to which he willingly offered himself to, even though he didn't deserve it. Because the punishment of death is only deserved by those who do what is wrong according to the Bible. That's the consequence of our rebellion as mankind. But Jesus willingly offered himself up to die anyway. Now, from the outside, this just seems like a very silly thing to do and a very foolish step to make. Think about all the good that a person who never does anything wrong could do for this world. Surely they could be trusted with power, where so many other people fail. Surely they could be trusted around women and children, where so many other people fail. Surely they could be trusted with money, with leadership, with friendship, our affections. What a waste. What change that person could bring. What a model they could be for the rest of humanity. But Jesus' death had more than it seemed in it, because Jesus didn't stay dead. After 3 days, he rose back to life. And this is surprising, but should it be? After all, it's only those who sin, who are part of the consequence of mankind's rebellion, that face death. But Jesus never sinned like that. He never did anything wrong. And if there's any reason to doubt that, his resurrection proved it. Because God would not have raised him back to life if he had been a rebel like the rest of mankind. He'd stay dead like so many people before him. But because Jesus was sinless, he deserved life. In fact, he deserved the life that God promised mankind way back in the Garden of Eden if they had only followed him. Life that was eternal, life that was free from sin, life that was good with a very good God. But that wasn't all the New Testament says about Jesus' death and resurrection. It also says Jesus' death was atoning. As in Jesus, by dying on a cross, substituted himself for us, took our place, died the death that we deserve so that we could become at one with God, so that we could have a restored relationship with God, so that we no longer would have to face judgment, no longer would have to face hell. God worked to restore relationship with humanity, while at the same time as doing that, dealing with the injustice of the evilness of sin itself. And so at Jesus' resurrection, we see an unprecedented situation occurs. We see someone who has defeated Satan, not only by refusing temptation, but also on the cross, as the Bible describes here, and Jesus' death upon it. And on top of that, Jesus lived a perfect life. Defeated Satan, he lived a perfect life and saved others from punishment that they deserved all at the same time. And what do we see historically when a group of people is saved by one particular individual? When one man comes in and saves a whole group, what do people often tell to that person? Long live the king. That's how history writes itself. We're often entrusting people who have saved us from situations and providing them with power and authority. And that's what's happening in Matthew 28. When Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, as in God has bestowed upon Jesus authority far stretching our bounds of understanding. Universal authority over heaven and earth as king because of what he has accomplished, because he is now king. As Paul would describe it in Philippians chapter 2 about Jesus, he says, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed upon him a name that is above every name, so that in the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Something shifted 2,000 years ago when a man named Jesus resurrected from the dead. Freedom from the grips of Satan and sin was finally seen. The solution for our sinful rebellion was finally discovered. Victory was seen. Hope for mankind was found. Light for the dark world that we live in was seen. I'm okay being in this timeline because in this timeline we have Jesus' victory. And I'm living over the other side of it. I'm in the gospel era. I'm in the good news era. And that changes everything, including the forest that the trees of our lives so often block. Jesus' victory has implications for the big pictures of our lives. And this is what we see here in Matthew 28. In Matthew 28, verses 19 to 20, Jesus says, go therefore. The therefore is referring back to what Jesus said about his authority. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. You see, this victory that Jesus won, the authority he has possession of as a king, is good news for this earth. The kind of news that you want to tell people about. Like when Ben & Jerry's has free ice cream on the Sunshine Coast. You don't have to tell people about the free ice cream. Everybody knows about the free ice cream. You don't have to be told to tell it's good news. It is just good news. Or like with primary schoolers. You'll notice primary schoolers these days going around saying 6-7. You don't have to tell a primary schooler to say 6-7 these days. Even ones that aren't even on the internet and are homeschooled and have no idea about it. It's wild. It's everywhere. Or like when a baby is born. You don't have to be told to tell you to go and say this is good news that a baby has been born. You naturally want to share the good news with others because a baby has been born. In fact, we have to be told the opposite, not to tell people and let the parents do it themselves. There's news that we have in our life that is plain shareable, that's viral, that we naturally want to communicate because of its contents. And the implication of Jesus' resurrection is that kind of news. It's world-changing. There's a king who is reigning, who is bringing in a kingdom where justice can be found, where love can be found, where eternal life free from sin can be found. There's a king who can offer forgiveness, life after death, victory over sin, a sure help, peace, a relationship with God, not by paying money, not by being perfect, not by having it all together, but because Jesus lived and rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. That is good news. And good news, the good news of Jesus is shareable. And as we see in verse 19, it should be shared. Jesus says, go therefore and make disciples. Disciple here means someone who is like a student to a teacher, a follower of Jesus. And so the disciples were told to tell people about Jesus, as in about what he has said and done, and bring people to place their faith in Jesus so that they'll be saved and become students of him like they are students in Jesus' school. Whereby being students in Jesus' school, they could learn from him what it means to live life like we were designed to live. So they could learn from Jesus how to walk a path of suffering in a world that is broken until Jesus returns and makes it right again. So they can learn from Jesus how to have a relationship with God. So you can learn from Jesus how to love, how to forgive, how to be generous, how to know, find true joy, how to know peace, how to have hope. Make disciples, they were told. Make followers of Jesus who learn from Jesus as their good and kind king. Make disciples. But also, Jesus said, don't just tell the people that you know. He says to go further than that. It's not like there's not enough of Jesus to go around. As if you're worried that all the ice cream from Ben & Jerry's will kind of run out and you invite someone along and they discover there's no ice cream there. Jesus is not like that. The spoils of Jesus, his victory is abundant, unprecedented. His authority is over heaven and earth. You don't have to be skimpy on the invites. And so Jesus tells the disciples to go make disciples of all nations. Disciples should be made from everywhere because what Jesus did was good news for everyone, regardless of culture or background or social standing or race or people group or country. All can come to Jesus. All can turn to him and experience salvation. All are invited to become citizens of his kingdom, so all should be told about him. Disciples should be made everywhere. And the disciples that are made, according to these verses, should also be baptized and taught. Baptism is a part of discipleship. It's for a disciple to publicly show their inward faith. It's like a wedding ring, right? When you get married, you put on your ring after you've said your vows, or maybe at the exact same time with the minister there. It publicly shows, a wedding ring publicly shows the vows you've made in your life. And the same as with baptism. It publicly shows the faith that we have in Jesus, that he is our king, that we've experienced the victory of Jesus, that we're part of his kingdom. Disciples should be made, and disciples who are made should be baptized, and disciples who are made should also be taught. And this is what we're going to cover next week. We have a responsibility for the maturity of other believers as well, according to these verses. We have a responsibility for others to be taught what Jesus has said and done. We have a responsibility for people not to be left alone to figure it out on themselves, but to help them to grow to become more and more like Jesus. We'll cover that more next week and some of the ways we're looking to do that here at Chancellor Church. But we have a responsibility to baptize, and we have a responsibility to teach and mature people in their faith. Jesus' resurrection changes everything. The good news about Jesus is world-altering. He is good news for every nation. And good news that is good news that it should be shared. God did not send Jesus to hide him in a corner, but rather to reveal him to the world so that many, many, many people could come to know him and be saved and find salvation in him. This is what we see in these last 4 verses of Matthew's Gospel, the Great Commission. That Jesus' resurrection has changed everything and that people should know this. But there is a problem though, isn't there? We often have heard this before. And then we kind of run into the same problem. It's one thing to agree that the news of Jesus should be shared with the world, and there's another thing to actually go and do it. If we're honest, we can live, and you might agree with me, with some guilt around this in our lives. We can probably think of some opportunities in our life that we didn't take up like we should have maybe. I know I can. Sometimes people's names or faces pop up in my mind who I had opportunities sharing faith with, but didn't. Sometimes I'll think of that person who wanted to catch up, who seemed open, but life just got way too much in the way. I think sometimes of a mate who I used to connect with well, but have become disconnected over the years, and now it seems too awkward to restart that friendship. I think of that neighbor that we always had plans to share our faith with, right, as a family, but we never did, and then we moved, and I don't know where they are now. We can struggle to share the good news. And we can have a number of variety of reasons why we don't, and some of them are good excuses, but some of them we know are just not. However, there is something profound we need to grasp in this commission of Jesus. And that's the last words of Matthew's Gospel. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. That's what Jesus says. If you have read Matthew's gospel, you might recall in Matthew chapter 1, it details Jesus' birth. And when it talks about naming him, they describe Jesus as what? Emmanuel, which then Matthew helpfully translates for us means God with us. Right there at the beginning of Matthew's gospel, Matthew wanted to highlight the reality that Jesus was God in the flesh and he was with his people. He was coming to be with his people. And here in the last verse of his gospel, he highlights that this is something that Jesus had promised himself too. Jesus said, I am always with you. And what that verse says is actually what that verse means. It's not one day I will be with you. Look at it carefully. It says right now, I am with you. He is right now here with his disciples. And he will be with his disciples, not just for a couple hours and then take off again. No, the presence of Jesus, according to these verses, is also enduring. This is made apparent by the word always there, right? In the Greek, the always that we translate in English there emphasizes the dayness of each day. It emphasizes the reality that in every minute of every day that Jesus is going to be with us. Every minute of every day till the end of the age, till the end of history as we know it, is what Jesus is communicating here. That's the promise. That's the promise he gives his disciples. And this is good news to us who have been told to share the good news of Jesus. This is good news to us who often struggle to see and live out this bigger picture in our life as a church and as individuals. Because we often forget that in Jesus' commission to make disciples, he promises that we won't be alone to do so. And making disciples is always done better together. It changes everything about the task. In fact, I'd argue it changes two things about the task. Number one, Jesus' presence helps us naturally share about Jesus. If there is free ice cream, I will naturally tell other people about free ice cream. I already have this morning, Ben and Jerry's. They do a free ice cream day. If there is a discount on Vitabrits, I eat Vitabrits for my cereal, not Wheat Bix. If there's a discount on Vitabrits, I'll be telling lots of people because it never goes on discount. If there is a fantastic rainbow, I'll be running and telling my daughter about that rainbow because she loves good rainbows. If there is a cool historical fact I discover, I'll find the people who appreciate history, which there is not that many. But I will tell them anyway and we'll have a good conversation. I share things that bring me joy. The things that are good news to me. And I'm sure you are the same. And if that's true, then we can also naturally share about Jesus as well. You see, when Jesus says he's with us always, that means we have an opportunity to constantly get to know Jesus more. Of seeing just how deep his grace is truly for me. Of seeing just how precious his care is for us in my own daily life. Of seeing just how true his ways are compared to my own ways. Of just seeing how much he loves us. If I live aware of the reality of Jesus being with me, tenderly caring for me, providing for me, forgiving for me, through whatever may come, then it means I have more of an opportunity to get to know Jesus and thereby increase my love for him. Experience Jesus' presence in my life increases my capacity for joy in him. And what I find joyful is what I naturally share. Sometimes telling others about Jesus can feel like it's a weird or unnatural add-on to the Christian life. He saved me, woohoo! But now I have to tell others about Jesus. I always knew there was a bit of a catch. So the solution to that feeling that we sometimes have, I think, is pushing into Jesus more. So it doesn't feel like an add-on, but rather a natural response too. Because why wouldn't I share to someone what I love? Why wouldn't I share about what brings me joy in my life? If you're wary of sharing Jesus, feel awkward about it. Instead of balking at the idea and backtracking, going, oh, that's just for some super Christians and other people are not me, my encouragement would be to push into Jesus instead. Get to know him in his word. Get to know him at church. Ponder on him. Think about him. And what you discover there, worship him because of that. And I think over time, you'll find some of those feelings naturally dissipate as you are caught up in the joy of him more and more and more. The happiest missionaries are the ones who are so caught up with Jesus that they just want to share him with others. And with the promise of Jesus' presence in our lives, I think we can be just like that. Secondly, Jesus' presence helps us to love people better. Let's face it, sometimes we don't want to share our faith because, well, we don't want to. That neighbor you've got that you have nothing in common with would take a lot of work to be able to tell about Jesus, wouldn't they? A lot of work. If you can't talk to them about normal stuff, how could you possibly bring up Jesus stuff? And don't get me started on those people that we actually find annoying and frustrating and that for some reason rub us the wrong way. But regardless of those feelings, we also feel at the same time conflicted because we feel guilt for not sharing those opportunities with them, sharing about Jesus with them. So what do? How do we handle all these natural barriers? Well, Pastor Robert Thune helpfully shares his experience in his book after describing his issues sharing the gospel with his neighbor and the feeling of guilty for not doing so. He said this, listen well. The answer to my dilemma with my neighbor came through the gospel. As God's grace began to renew my heart, I saw that the root problem was my own selfishness and lack of love. My love for my neighbor was conditional. If he were younger or smarter or had more in common with me, I would have appreciated him more. I began to repent of this sin and renew my mind by the promises of the gospel, especially the fact that God loved me while I was still a sinner. God had graciously my heart. A strange thing happened. My attitude toward my neighbor began to change. I began to feel a true love and appreciation for him. And it wasn't just a feeling I'd mustered up, but one that came naturally. The eternal renewal of the gospel propelled me outward in love and service toward my neighbor. Mission became a joy and not a burden. Do you see how the presence of Jesus impacted and helped this man's life? He recognized in this instance, he simply just had a bad attitude towards his neighbor. He was actually being sinful. And so he came to Jesus once again for forgiveness, for his lack of love. And by drawing close to Jesus, he was reminded again of what Jesus is actually like. How Jesus showed him undeserved grace. And by being reminded of Jesus in this kind of way, it led to a greater love for his neighbor. Because how could he not love when he is so loved in that kind of way? Just like the kindness of a person can brighten up our day, so the love and grace of Jesus as seen in the gospel can transform our hearts to love others well and share the gospel well. If you struggle to share Jesus because of the person you are wanting to share to and you kind of have a disconnect, you just don't want to do it, the solution is not mustering up a fake love for that person. The solution is not mustering up the willpower to do it out of some sort of legalistic way, but rather it's actually pushing deeper into Jesus. It's repenting of how we are treating someone. It's asking for forgiveness and grace. And by experiencing that, naturally, we will be compelled to share that love and grace that we have experienced with others. Jesus' presence changes our hearts. And his presence helps us to love others better. And thereby helps us to actually share the good news about him with others. Jesus' presence changes everything. You aren't making disciples by yourself, but you are making them together with him. Because Jesus knows making disciples is better together. You don't have to go alone. It can be hard at this time of the year to see the forest because of the trees. It can be hard at this time of the year and in our Christian life to be caught up in the everyday. It's too easy to be caught up in the everyday, I should say. But the life of a Christian is more than just trees. It involves the forest. And the forest is that Jesus has come and he's changed everything. His victory and forgiveness and life is available to the world. And we have been asked to let others know about it so that they can experience what we have found in him too. So this year, as a church, we will go. Despite the trees, despite what will come. But remember, we're not going to go alone. Not only will we have Jesus with us transforming this command to go to the nations with the gospel message of him, but we'll also have each other. One of God's gifts for us is his church. And so this year, we are going to work on making disciples together, as a church together, with Jesus together. There's a lot of togetherness. And so I want to highlight now just 3 ways that we're planning on doing that this year, so that we can go together and fulfill this big picture task together well. The first one is coming up in a couple weeks. On the 15th of Feb, we're going to have Captain Barry Wilmore. Kelsey, could you put up the church lunch slide? That'd be great. On the 15th of Feb, we're going to have Captain Barry Wilmore. He's going to be coming to our church to basically share the gospel with us. Talk about his time in space. He was the guy who was stuck in the space station for 9 months, you might have heard about on the news. He was up there for a long time. He's in town with a conference with Answers in Genesis, and we've been able to grab him for a Sunday morning. And it's going to be a really awesome opportunity to be able to hear about the gospel from an astronaut. I don't think I've ever said that statement before in my life. It'll be a great opportunity for people in the community to come along. It's family friendly. It's going to be a good event. We're also going to have lunch after as well, so we can have some good fellowship together. And so maybe if you have a friend who doesn't know Jesus and you've been kind of looking for an opportunity to invite them along to church, on the 15th of Feb, that could be the Sunday to do it. An opportunity for them to hear about God's creation and how that points to Jesus, and hear this man's testimony as well. I'd encourage you to bring someone along on the 15th of Feb. That's one way as a church that we are seeking to make sure we can grasp hold of the big picture, grasp hold of the forest, and make disciples. The second way is in May, we're going to be doing an evangelism course as a church. We're going to do a Christianity Explained type course. We haven't exactly figured out whether it's going to be Alpha or Discover or Life courses, a bunch of them these days. But on the 15th of May, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be doing it most likely here in the hall. We're going to try to have a meal together. Or often your home group or small group or Bible study, or whatever you call it, catches up. We catch up with the same type of people we've got to know for a while. And what an awesome opportunity it is with these people to actually be on mission together with them. There's a couple of ways that this can happen in a home group setting. One, for example, and this is me because purely I just want to play squash. If you have a mate who likes to play squash who's non-Christian, and you have a friend who likes to play squash, which is me, hi, why don't you and that mate and your friend catch up as a Christian and non-Christian, just play squash together. If you're part of the home group, you can kind of pray with each other about this opportunity and just do life with that guy. Invite them into things that you already enjoy doing together as a Christian community, as you might already enjoy doing together as part of a home group. So get some people a part of your home group and do something you enjoy together, invite a non-Christian along. Or the second way we could do something as a home group and be on mission in home groups is by actually throwing dinner. Hardly any people get to be invited over other people's houses these days and be welcomed over for a dinner or a party or whatever that looks like. So why not use your home group as an opportunity to throw a dinner party? Invite some of your non-Christian and Christian friends along and let people mingle. You don't have to be the only person in that person's life to share the faith. Why not share the load and love and care for that person with other people too? Why not be friends together with other people and love those people well? So in our home groups, we can catch up, we can splinter off, and do things that we enjoy doing, or we could work together and every now and then throw some sort of social, invite people along. There's lots of different ways together as a church. But there's three. 15th of February, come along for church on a Sunday, bring a non-Christian friend along, bring a kid who's really into astronauts and things like that. On the May, we're going to be doing an evangelism course, so have a think through some of the people that you may know in your life who might be wanting to take up that opportunity to explore and make an informed decision about Jesus. And start having a think in your home group how you can be on mission together. Friends, we can't afford to lose sight of the forest as a church. We can't afford to lose sight of the big picture. We need to be a church that is making disciples, that is maturing disciples, that is multiplying disciples. Jesus has given us a responsibility to do that. And so this year, we will go with his grace and strength together. Let's pray as we close. Father, we thank you for your kindness as a church. We thank you for all the goodness you have done and brought to us over the last couple of years, and how your grace and strength have transformed our lives over and over again. Lord, over the last couple of years, we have seen your faithful hand in our midst. You've risen up people and given them leadership. You've brought people to come to faith. You've given us friendship and fellowship. You've served us and loved us so well. Lord, in response to Jesus' resurrection, in response to the change dynamics that this world has because of Jesus' resurrection, Lord, help us to be people that go. Help us to be people who don't lose sight of this bigger picture, but rather will go out and make disciples as you have commanded. Lord, as we do go, help us to not forget that you are with us. Help us to remember your presence that changes everything. And help us to not forget our brothers and sisters as well. Lord, please show mercy and grace to us as we step out this year to make disciples. Help us as a church to do so. Help us to not lose sight of you and your big plans for this world. In Jesus' name.